JJ Hantsch, welcome to the program.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Can you tell us more about your background?
Sure. I studied developmental linguistics for years at the University of Chicago, and even though I graduated and left the university, I've always been fascinated by it. And the origin of language is one of those great problems that a great deal of ink has been spilled, or electrons have been have been um, wired after for hundreds of years. Um, so it's always been a fascinating area for me, and I've tried to keep up with the literature, and that's what I'm here to talk about today.
I just want to point out that your actual profession is in software development.
So I do statistics. So
Okay,
I'm what's called a statistical programmer. So
let's dive into the origin of language. In my
sure,
preparation, I was looking at some resources online before, and a lot of them describe it, but very few actually pinpoint what happened to these
sure,
creatures roaming the earth to start actually talking and using words. It's quite
sure.
fascinating.
Well, no, it is. It is. You're preaching to the choir on that one. It's just humans are the only species we know of that has a language, and throughout the animal kingdom, there's certain other species that have, I would say, parts of it, as in certain birds can be taught to emulate sounds and can even do words and sounds, but they're very much mimics. They don't seem to actually produce unique sentences, at least not on a significant level. Higher primates, chimps, gorillas, and bonobos have been taught various forms of language symbols, or the symbols of language, either ASL for sign language, or a computer-based language, and they can communicate on some level. But when humans develop language, when children develop language, they have they kind of have a very solid progression where they learn the rhythm of their native language, they learn some of the sounds, and then they get to a point where, and in developmental psycholinguistics we call it 2.5 MLU, mean language units. So when a child gets to about 2.5 language units in their utterances, all of a sudden they leap ahead, and it's called fast mapping, where they pick up words at a stupendous rate. It's The average child acquires about 20 words a day, and no other animal ever crosses that bridge. Okay, you can get gorillas to do ASL at a certain level, and they'll identify apples or cups or people. They'll give names and things like that, but they never cross that 2.5 MLU barrier. And so the argument has been made, and I believe accepted, that none of them are actually using language. That chimps, even though you can get some very clever chimps, and the 2.5 is kind of a guideline. I mean, I've seen some data that there's an ape that does like 2.6 is their mean, but they clearly haven't crossed that bridge. I would say they're still on the bridge, and that fast mapping has never been observed in anybody but human beings. Now, every human being seems to go through that, or every human being who develops language seems to go through that, and that's That's an amazing period. And it's just um, when scientists try to roll the clock back to when did language first develop in human beings, it's very hard. I mean, there's no animal cognates to, there's no. I mean, if bonobos were fair at language, we'd say, okay, well, when were we at that level? But it's clear, at some point human beings crossed that level and started having those language explosions and that fast mapping and um, when did that happen? There's some suspicion that Neanderthals had that. So it was farther down the hominid line, but um, and there's clearly some things. There's clearly some things in the hominid evolution um, that are. It's a confusing topic because in evolution you have accretion events and you have cranes, evolutionary cranes, and to get language you clearly have to have at least a couple of both of those. So it's thought that hominids had to learn how to mimic other sounds, okay, which gave us our vocal tract, okay, and that's an accretion event. That's an evolution that's accretion, because our closest relatives, like chimps, they do not have the exact same vocal apparatus as us. It's very closely related. I mean, here, if I drink water, okay, every drop of water goes over the tube to my lungs and down into my stomach, okay, and that's actually a weakness in modern human beings, in that it's very easy to choke on food. I mean, because every morsel of food, every drop of water goes over that portion. And if I mean, we've all had the experience of a little bit of food gets down the wrong pipe, and it's very uncomfortable. And I mean, you can tell it, and yet human beings develop that because, well, I mean, um, the theory is for the ability to mimic. Human beings' vocal apparatus is much more complex than chimpanzees. We can make a much wider variety of sounds, and um, it's there obviously had to be an evolutionary reason why that developed, but whatever it was, it's an accretion event, as in, by accretion event, you have a little bit better is better, and then a little bit more better is better, and you can go through multiple generations of each generation gets better, and those human beings who were able to do something a little bit better than the previous generation were more likely to thrive and to pass on their genes, and so on. I mean, it's normal evolution. That's what we think of. I often think of it as like the development of polar bears. We know that polar bears were derived from a small population of brown bears that got trapped in the Arctic and had to feed on seals. And brown bears come in a variety of colors, and all the way from chocolate brown to tan. Obviously, the lighter the ancestor of the polar bears got, the better they were able to hide against the snow, the more successful they were, the more likely they were to pass along their genes. And it's a process that's fairly easy to observe, getting to pure white, which is what polar bears are now. And so that's an accretion event. So human beings, our vocal apparatus clearly went through an accretion event. Now, the why, what the advantage was, I mean, it's almost certainly the more complex mimicry of sounds. And I mean, if you think of it, human ancestors lived on the savanna in Africa. we had to compete with a whole bunch of other animals. I mean, some of which, lions are very dangerous. You had to be able to do different sounds. There were scavengers about. There were dangerous animals. There were prey animals. And it's thought that as soon as we started both scavenging and hunting, that that mimicry ability became a big advantage. And human beings with our opposable thumb and our hands, we had access to something that's very rare among among savanna hunters is we would have access to bone marrow, which is extremely nutritious. I mean, it's an excellent source of calories and would support populations and of predators of other animals on the savanna. Really, only hyenas have the ability to get at bone marrow. I mean, they have the jaws strong enough. It's kind of a luxury. A cheetah definitely does not have the ability to get at bone marrow. So if a human being scavenging came upon a cheetah kill, or something a cheetah had killed, then they could grab the long bones and crack those open and get to the nutritious marrow. But then again, you're competing with other animals. You have to make sounds to warn of the approach of lions or and I mean, the other type of hunting that it's thought that humans did, which was endurance hunting, where you run down antelope simply by continuously pursuing them until their muscles are exhausted. Human beings are very good at distance running like that, and could hunt in that way. That's still the ability to mimic, as a warning system, was very important. So, clearly that developed, and that's long before modern humans arrived. Neanderthals had very similar vocal apparatus. I'm not sure about Homo erectus or Homo habilis, but it's thought that occurred. And yeah, I mean, it's like fire. We had fire long before we were modern humans, and so our vocal apparatus had appeared and evolved, and yet it's thought that, I mean, it's open to question whether Neanderthals had language. Okay, but it's almost certain that Homo habilis didn't and Homo erectus didn't have language. So, when did that occur? Well, I personally believe it's a much later event, and I pin it to the Toba eruption, which was 74,000 years ago.
Yeah, I want to ask you about this, but
Sure.
before you move forward, I was listening, and it's what an incredible story, this evolution. But I
Mm-hmm.
always wondered, why did we develop this way? Why evolution happens to us this particular way? Was it more fruitful to us? Like if we stand up on two legs instead of four, is that
Yeah,
advantageous in terms?
bipedal locomotion. Yeah, is that so? Um, it's thought that bipedal locomotion was a response to the opening of savannas in Africa, because um, Africa, depending on the ice ages, has gone through several climate shifts. Um, if you're in the forests, I mean, if you live in the forests, in the trees, okay, then being bipedal isn't really a huge advantage, okay? But if you're on the savanna where trees are much rarer, and you don't use them for I mean, occasionally you use them, but climbing trees isn't your normal um, place to live, then bipedal locomotion is much more efficient than you'll see chimpanzees going around on their knuckles. I mean, they can walk on their hind legs, but they often go on fours, walking on their knuckles as well. And that's because chimpanzees never never completely shifted to the savanna and stayed in the trees. And I will say, so chimps aren't our direct ancestors. We share a common ancestor with them, but that's been separate for um, several million years. I don't know exactly how many, but and it's thought that our progenitors, who separated from the chimps, that they found themselves in need of going around the savannah, and that bipedal, walking on 2 feet was much more efficient. Um, but again, that's going to be an accretion, evolution adaptation, and it took many generations to get to our level of walking and running, then away from other apes.
In terms of the Toba eruption that you started talking about,
Sure.
have we developed language at that time, or it happened way before we actually developed
Yeah, nobody's
language?
absolutely certain. I mean, it, it's impossible to get a definitive answer on that, because, I mean, here's a supposition: if so, modern humans had appeared significantly before that, probably at least at 100,000 years ago, and quite possibly, I mean, it's hotly debated. I mean, maybe it was 150,000 years ago. So it was tens of thousands of years before the Toba eruption that modern humans appeared. So we certainly had the vocal apparatus for language. Okay, 100,000 years ago, there were modern humans, and they had the exact same speech apparatus as you and me. Okay, and they could make the same sounds. All right. But um, the question is, did they have modern language? All right, and now Chomsky says it was a simple genetic development, and he specifies the one gene that switched and turned on modern language. And I'll be honest, I find that preposterous that it's not one gene, that switched. I mean, just look at it this way: if that gene occurred in one human being, who did they talk to? I mean, you can't have language without two people at a minimum. So, and if one person had that gene, then what's the survival advantage to that? There is none. And now, I mean, maybe they got lucky and they had children, okay, and yeah, they could talk to their kids, but it's not until it's required of the community to start speaking that language would appear, and I mean, that just doesn't work. I mean, as far as I'm concerned. Now, I'm sure Noam Chomsky would argue with me on that. So to answer your question, 100,000 years ago, so at least 25,000 years before Toba, okay, modern humans existed. They certainly had the vocal apparatus that we have. Um, and it's a big debate whether they had language. Okay. Now, um, they were, we do know they were a hunter gatherer population. Okay. And it was, the males did most of the hunting, and the females did most of the gathering. I mean, we see that in Stone Age societies nowadays. Okay, that's the division of labor, and I mean, was the hunting advanced? Nobody can answer that. I mean, without having a time machine, which we don't, and going back and grabbing someone from 100,000 years ago, I mean, we can't ask them the question. Okay, but I personally think that, well, okay, so the human population was actually very successful at that point. It was growing. I mean, it was the geographic spread of the population was quite limited. Um, it's thought that pre-Toba, um, I mean, the human population had started growing out of Africa. I mean, there's evidence that the subcontinent of India had an early human population, and I've even seen some evidence that Australia had something of a human population, small but present, but certainly the cradle of human society at that time was Africa. I mean, the population was developing there. Now, keep in mind, at this time, you certainly had Neanderthals in a big arc from Eurasia, all through Europe and Asia. I mean, it's thought they had been driven out of Africa, or were not present in Africa anymore. And was that by modern humans who were more efficient? That's possible. And the individual conflict there would have been, I mean, a single Neanderthal would be more than a match for a modern human. Their physique is just much stronger than modern humans. The only way modern humans would have replaced them is by basically out resourcing them, and that's not known. I mean, that's a very difficult way to. Well, it's either out resourcing or out technologying them. I mean, even in modern day, technological wars are bloody and long lasting and very difficult. So, yeah, I mean,
Just to give context to the listeners, when we talk about Toba eruption, so Toba eruption is a giant mountain in Indonesia, I believe, and
yes,
yeah, and it had a massive, gigantic eruption, volcanic eruption at some point, which released so much stuff to the atmosphere that it caused the Earth to cool down for what is known as the winter.
Right.
I don't know.
Nuclear winter, right?
Yes.
I mean, it was so. Toba is an island in the Sumatra region of Indonesia, the eastern part, right by where Singapore is. And the key is that it's just a few degrees south latitude. Okay, which means that that eruption in about 74,000 years ago released 100 times the sulfur dioxide that Pinatubo, the mountain in the Philippines, released, and it's thought that it caused a nuclear winter for the entire Earth. Obviously, being basically right on the equator, the gas could spread to both. I mean, the particles and the gas could spread to both the northern and southern hemisphere, disrupt weather patterns, and most importantly, disrupt photosynthesis. And plant life would have been not eradicated, but it would have been greatly adversely affected.
Of course, the Toba eruption have killed millions and probably of humans, and this puts a lot of pressure on the surviving ones. Please talk more about this.
Sure. Well, so I don't think it was millions of human beings, because I'm not sure there were a million human beings pre-Toba. I mean, assumptions run that it was possibly as high as 100,000. So there is genetic evidence that there was a bottleneck shortly thereafter, in which only somewhere less than 10,000 human beings survived. 10,000 human beings out of a population of 100,000 before is a 90% casualty rate. And it's something that, as modern human beings, we don't think of. Most of those people starved to death. I mean, Toba was such a huge blast. Did it kill some people, by lava and dropping things on them? Probably. Okay. But the vast majority of people starved to death. it probably ended the monsoon rains for a couple of years, 2 or 3 years consecutive. Interrupted it interrupted photosynthesis on a massive scale. Um, the like I said, the 100,000 human beings was reduced to less than 10,000. And I mean, the thought is it's somewhere between 1,000 and 5,000 breeding pairs. And so if a small population had gotten to Australia, okay, if a small human population had gotten to Australia, I mean, say it was 1,000 individuals. Well, bam, you're down to 90% casualty rate. You're down to 100, and because males are the hunters, and it might be 90 males and 10 females. Well, is 10 females enough to sustain the population? That's an open question, and I mean, there's no way to answer that question, but it's quite possible that the population of Australia was wiped out. I mean, the first population, and even if they survived, it took maybe 1,000 years for the survivors elsewhere to breed enough people to expand to Australia again. And the population in the Indian subcontinent, that's unknown. This would have Toba would have released enough acid into the ocean to disrupt part of the food chain there, and would that affect fish? Would there be I mean, there very well might be a massive die-off of fish, and anybody who depended on fish or crustaceans or any of that might have faced starvation that way.
Right,
And
but let's talk about the relationship between Toba and language or evolution of
Sure,
language.
sure. Well, okay, so the thought is that with photosynthesis cut off, that the gathering aspect, okay, so the gathering aspect is gathering plants, basically, okay, fruits, nuts, berries, tubers, that with the photosynthesis greatly reduced, that those plants wouldn't have survived or wouldn't have been producing food. I mean, bushes produce berries when they've had a good season, and I mean, even now, sometimes berries have a poor season and they don't produce a lot of berries, and sometimes they have a good season and they produce a bountiful harvest. Well, Tobo would have disrupted that, and you would have had a couple of years of absolutely lousy harvests. Okay, and which means that the females weren't contributing. I hate to say, they weren't pulling their weight in calorie delivery. Okay, which means it fell on the males to do the hunting. Okay, now if the monsoon is disrupted in East Africa, the big migration of antelope. I mean, we still see it to this day, that the zebras and wildebeests and antelope, they migrate in kind of a circular pattern, and they're vulnerable to hunting at each of those. But they chase after the new grasslands. Well, if the monsoon rain doesn't come, there's no new grasslands, and those animals aren't moving. So you've got human populations that are going to be greatly stressed in their ability to hunt. Not to mention that the gathering is gone, and all of a sudden it's a matter of which small groups of humans are the best hunters. Okay, well, which small groups of humans are the best hunters are the most advanced linguistically. Okay,
They
if
can
you can
collaborate with each other. They
you can
can team.
collaborate better.
Mhm.
Correct. Okay, if you've got 10 hunters and you can collaborate, well, maybe you have twice the chance of bringing down a game animal, or I mean, without the animals migrating, you may not be able to scavenge, but if you can, if you can find them, then you have an advantage. So you know, and how do you find them? Well, somebody sees them and communicates that to others. Well, that's language. So it's thought that language was the key right there. And I know you've had a previous guest who said about 50,000 years ago, he said 50 to 60,000 years ago, modern humans changed how we collaborate. Well, I would propose that maybe his number is 10,000 years wrong. I mean, I don't know what he would say about that, but it would, what if it was Toba that caused that event? I mean, where 90% of the population is starving, I mean, that's an extinction level event for human beings. And, is it language that's the key advantage? So, is it, is that where human language came from? Is that those of us who were just that little bit further along, now you're talking 10% of the, take the best 10% of the population as far as language, and those are the ones who barely survive. They survive, because they're better hunters, they're better coordinated. And no, I mean, there is some luck in there, of course, but there's a huge genetic disparity there. Just the average gets wiped out by famine, and those who are just that bit better survive. And that's I mean, it's obviously with things this far in the past, it's hard to date precisely. Okay. But Toba was a major event which affected the entire human population and caused a bottleneck. And is that survivor bias, is that language?
I feel it could be like sometimes, you will have a society, a small part of the society, they will develop interest, they find interest in, let's say, playing a guitar. What I'm trying to say is that a part of the population would develop an interest in a skill that they hone without an immediate benefit from it. And
Right.
perhaps that was a group of these humans in Africa.
And what if it's 5% that play guitars that survives? Yeah,
that's exactly what I'm reaching to. So these small groups who have honed in their vocal abilities to make a little bit more complex sounds, and they kind of get together like the guitar people. Because yesterday I was walking in the neighborhood, I saw people in the garage and playing guitar together. So it looks like there's this group of humans at the time honing their communication skills and what have you. And then all of a sudden the Toba eruption happened, and they see everybody's dying, and they will figure out, hey, you know what? We could work together much better to survive.
Right.
And they kind of survived, and they become the elite of society who have actually made it. And then they start reproducing.
The other possibility, I guess, would be like being an archer, having bows, okay, which, would make you a better hunter. But I think that's out of sync with the archaeological development. I mean, obviously it's hard to find bows in the archaeology of pre-humans, but I mean, clearly we had it at some point. But language, being able to coordinate better, being better hunters because of that coordination.
Right. So I'm still confused on where the disagreement with Chomsky is. So Chomsky is saying that there is one mutation in the brain that occurred, according to him, probably to one person. But let's say there is a mutation. We all agree that there's a mutation, that we are predisposed for language. A baby is definitely much better than a chimp baby in learning language, no matter how much you teach the chimp. So therefore, we as humans, we are predisposed. We have some sort of genetic preference to learn and use language. Now, where's the disagreement with Chomsky?
Chomsky says it's that one gene, okay, which was modified, okay, and he says that was now genetic spread like that takes hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions of years. So he says that was 1,000,000 years ago. Okay. Well, um, I I disagree. I mean, it was probably, I mean, I don't know when that gene modification happened, but that's, I mean, clearly we do have a predisposition towards language. Okay, but I'm not sure language was a survival advantage or a key survival advantage until something as bad as Toba happened. And so what if by the time of Toba, half of the population had that language capacity and it wasn't a big survival advantage. Okay. And then all of a sudden Toba happens, and now that portion of the population that has that and is lucky survives and passes on their, and I mean it's just all of the people who don't have the language capacity die. Um, I mean it's Chomsky says that language mutation, that gene was key, and that was the, and I disagree. It's just you have to have the behavioral event. I mean, you have to have the external event, and I'm hypothesizing that was Toba, which which was key, and that made it critical to have language and to have the and I mean, you go back to 10,000. I mean, you go back to 10,000 human beings, or fewer, post Toba, and then they start repopulating the hominid niche very, very quickly, and they spread all the way, the arc across the Arabian Peninsula, the Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia, all the way to Australia, within maybe 1,000 years. I mean, that's a rapid expansion. But once the global winter or the nuclear winter from Toba dissipated, and it's thought that it was only 3 years or perhaps 5 years, that once that dissipated, now you have gathering works again, but your competitors have been wiped out, and you have hunting is again very productive, because the monsoons have restarted, the animals are back, and instead of competing with 100 other populations, you're not competing against another population, it's yours, so it's much more productive. It's the birth rate must have shot up, and or the survival rate must have shot up, and people started spreading very quickly after that, and it wasn't that many thousand years before we encountered Neanderthals and started pushing them back.
Yeah, that's interesting. So you're saying that there wasn't a sudden change in biology, like there wasn't like a sudden mutation or any of that sort. We were already having that skill. I made the
Right,
comparison recently with guitar. Like, okay, we already had
right,
the
right.
abilities, the physical abilities, but we didn't find a lot of use for it because food was plenty. There was no
Right.
pressure for us to use it. It's just like nobody knows how to use Zoom, perhaps before the pandemic, right? The pandemic puts us in a position where we
Absolutely.
have to work from home and learn how to adapt and use the skills that we didn't use before to survive in the post-pandemic era. So the same way happened when Toba eruption occurred.
Absolutely.
It's kind of that
Absolutely.
puts us in a pressure to utilize the physical abilities we already have, and that's how you are saying is different
Yep.
from Chomsky's thinking.
Absolutely. So let me give you a ridiculous one. Okay. So what if there was a group that developed the ability to be superb at basketball? Okay. and this occurred in 200,000 years ago, okay, that this group of humans was absolutely superb at basketball. Well, nobody played basketball until the 1890s, all right? It's a completely useless skill, okay? I mean, it has no survival advantage. And now it gradually spreads across the population, okay? But I mean, there's no enhancement to your likelihood to, to survive. I mean,
You can
there's no
jump higher.
right. I mean, there's no basketball courts. There's no
If,
competition on it.
if
There's
I'm followed by a lion, I can run and grab like a tree and like.
okay, a moderate advantage, but okay, but all of a sudden, Toba erupts and basketball hoops appear everywhere. Okay, well now that population that can play basketball better has that survival advantage. Okay,
Hmm.
so Chomsky says it was the development of the language gene that was the key survival advantage. And I say it wasn't until Toba happened that it
Right, but
was.
how does Chomsky defend against this argument?
So realize this, okay? In philosophy, we say there is a difference between realism and idealism. Chomsky's idealism in linguistics is that there is one perfect version of English, okay? That you and I and he all have a vision of, okay? But there is one ideal English sitting out there, okay? Now, um, at the time that Chomsky was just getting out of grad school in the 50s, in the late 50s, the dominant theory on language was that it was strictly a behavior, okay? And Chomsky was able to destroy that quite thoroughly, okay? He wrote a review of, there was a psychologist named B.F. Skinner who did, who basically said that language is simply a behavior and it's just an acquired behavior, okay? And Chomsky was able to show that that was inadequate, okay? That language is a logical structure that has a great deal of it has a great deal of complexity simply beyond a behavior. Okay. Now, B.F. Skinner was a realist. Okay. And Chomsky shifted all the way over to idealism. And it's just if you look at sciences, I mean, just any science, they always kind of shift back and forth between realism and idealism, between models that explain things and the scientific studies that either confirm or deny aspects of that. And I'm very familiar with the history of physics, and there was a model of the atom called the plum pudding model, okay, which experimental physicists were able to disprove that. But it wasn't until somebody came along with a better model that it shifted over, and so that person was an idealist. Okay, they had an ideal version. Okay, and the experimental physicists were realists because they were testing aspects of it and they were poking holes in it. And Chomsky did the exact same thing in linguistics. He said your model is entirely. He said to B.F. Skinner, your model is entirely inaccurate, inadequate, and it's a logical construct. Language is entirely a logical construct. Now, the problem with that is there's always some validity in, I mean, the plum pudding model of the nucleus explained some things, but it was inadequate for explaining everything. And Chomsky's model of generative linguistics is inadequate for some things as well. Okay. I mean, I can give you a very simple example. So Chomsky says that all distinctions are binary. Okay. And so when you go to phonology, one of those binary ones is voicing. So in English, we have voiced and we have unvoiced consonants. So T and D. Okay. So the T is unvoiced and the D is voiced. Okay. And you can, I mean, when you make those sounds, you can, T, T. There's no voicing involved. D, I have to make some voicing. All right. And S and Z is the same thing. Okay. It clearly works in English. Okay. But when you go to some other human languages, so the language of Thailand, the Southeast Asian country, it used to be called Siam. So the language Thai has voiced, unvoiced, and what's called pre-voiced. And it's very easy to show that babies that are learning Thai make that distinction very, very clearly. Okay. Now, you and I, as English speakers, we don't bother. Okay. And in fact, the word Thai has pre-voicing. The voicing comes before the consonant or before the stop. Okay. And don't ask me to make it. I can't do it. but it's in transliteration, it's that TH. Okay.
Yeah, but what does that prove?
That there's 3, not 2.
Oh.
It's not binary. Okay. So Chomsky's assumption that everything is binary is false. Okay.
Interesting.
And I mean, throughout language, you can come up with counterexamples of binary. Okay. I mean, is it handy for English speakers, voiced and unvoiced? Absolutely. Okay. But it's not universal. And if it's a feature of human language, it's got to be universal.
Who is the person pioneering that opposition against Chomsky right now?
Well, he was my advisor at University of Chicago. So, he's passed away, but his name is Vic Ingve, Yngve. He wrote several texts on it. And ironically, he was on the committee that hired Noam Chomsky at MIT, although Chomsky refused to acknowledge that.
Right.
Yeah.
There's also a TED Talk that I sent you right before we start recording, so definitely you didn't have the chance to look at it, by Michael Corballis. Does that ring a bell? No.
Well, I've read Corballis's work. Yeah, sure.
Okay. Yeah.
It's you have to realize something, and I mean, your description has it that Chomsky is seen as such a giant in the field of linguistics. Okay, that no one. I mean, I'm out of linguistics. Okay, I'm not in academic linguistics. Okay, so I will, I will say he's wrong on some things. Okay, but anybody in academic linguistics will never take Chomsky on, not while he's alive. Okay, now he's I don't think it's Chomsky is an immortal. I don't want to say nearing the end of his life, but he's nearing the end of a normal lifespan, and he's not going to be alive forever. And I've talked to multiple major names in linguistics, and not one of them would allow me to give you that names, but who say that every major academic linguist in the United States has a paper sitting in the bottom drawer of their desks, waiting for the day that Chomsky passing away is announced. Simply because they'll submit all those papers will be submitted that day. Because Chomsky, if he saw any of those, would would attack immediately. I mean,
But why? I mean, isn't that the virtue of academic dialogue? Is like people like present opposing papers and everybody expresses their like. Why is Chomsky everybody is afraid of?
It's just he does not tolerate dissent. I mean, he attacks. I mean, I had a burgeoning academic career in linguistics, and because I refused to, I'm treated as an apostate. No academic linguist, linguist would hire me. That's why I work in a completely different field. That's been going on for 40 years.
Is it like a cult or something?
Yeah. I mean, even in science fiction, okay, Chomsky rarely, if ever, gets mentioned in science fiction. Aware that his because I mean he's reduced generative linguistics to one rule. It's called move alpha, and that's just not going to be productive and past the point where he's gone. It's just linguistics is a social science that can be a science or it can be almost a humanities or a field in the humanities. And Chomsky with his idealism has pulled it far over to one side of that. And there's a realism movement which will resurge once he's gone from the scene. Okay. But I mean, Vic Ingvey, my advisor, told me about conferences he went to in linguistics where Chomsky humiliated people who opposed him. And I mean, Vic even talked about one conference where somebody got up and was very conciliatory, saying, well, we can all work together. We're all linguists here. And Chomsky got up and basically pulled a Nikita Khrushchev and said, no, we will bury you, and proceeded to do so. That person's, I mean, you have to realize that academic linguistics doesn't have an independent source of funding. It's all dependent on research funding. So killing an academic's funding, I mean, ends the debate. I mean, it's like global warming. When global warming first appeared, there was a healthy debate over is it accurate or is it not? And I think that debate has been truncated. I mean, it's not that I don't believe in global warming. It's just when it comes to different models of global warming, okay, there's a very accurate, I mean, it's called an R-squared test. How good is this model or that model at predicting the future? Okay, we have 60 some years of good climate data. I mean, since the IGY in 1958, 1959, we have good climate data since that time. And whenever somebody says, oh, do you believe in this climate model? I say, well, what is the R-squared? How accurate is the prediction? I mean, in sports, I have a friend who says he can predict every NFL game, what the final score will be, before the game starts. And he gives me, he's like, oh, why don't you bet on this? And I don't really bet. Okay. And he says, well, you're throwing money away by not following my, and I always ask him, well, how good were you last year at picking the NFL? and I mean, maybe I mean, there's 17 games. It's a 17-week season, so maybe he's 34-10. Well, I mean, that's pretty good, and I guess you'd make money on that, but it's not perfect. Okay,
Definitely. But what
right.
you're describing is like academic or intellectual bullying that's happening.
I would say Chomsky is very good at that. Um, and now Chomsky has moved out to politics as well. I mean, most non-linguists I know him from his views on you know on political topics, and in which he carries out the same, I mean, perhaps with less effectiveness, but he has the same approach. So
Right. So now
um,
let's switch gears to tie things together. So,
okay,
listeners have gone probably an hour of this talk
sure,
trying to hone in the origins of language and all of that.
sure,
And then you mentioned during your talk about how we are the only creatures who mastered that
hmm,
language, right?
right, right.
And all of a sudden, these language models are doing very good job at learning the only thing that makes us human, in your words as well.
So sentence structure. I Okay, I'm the kind of person who likes to test those. Okay, so um, I'll enter nonsense words in an article, and I'll ask it to summarize. Okay, now for me, what I do, I mean, because I speak Japanese, I will put in a couple of Japanese nouns or verbs in there. Okay, with English conjugation, but but not things that the average English speaker, and I test the result. Okay, and it's not that I get understand. I mean, ChatGPT understands this is a noun. Okay, or this is a verb. I mean, it has a good grasp of English sentence structure, and when you write a paragraph and use the same word consistently, it knows to summarize based on that. Okay, but you can get it to produce effectively a garbage summary by sticking in. I mean, I'm sure you could do the same. I mean, you speak a foreign language. I'm sure you could use nouns that and trick it into, this is an article about you know uh, something that it's not, and you could get a summary that used that noun. It wouldn't be understanding. It would be understanding the structure. And human language definitely has, you have clause structure, you have sentence structure, and you have argument structure. Okay, and ChatGPT is very good at picking up all of those. Okay, but it doesn't know, it doesn't have the experience to say, well, I'm not really saying anything intelligent here. Okay, so it can rip out that structure, okay? But it can replicate that, and it can produce summaries of those things. Okay, but is that understanding? I maintain no, it's not. It's handy summarization. It's I mean, I have a friend who's a minister, um, and she uses ChatGPT on her sermons. Okay, and so she'll mention a biblical figure. Okay, and um, she'll mention a biblical figure multiple times, and ChatGPT doesn't know who that figure is. Okay, and doesn't know characteristics of that person except what is in her sermon about that. Okay, so um, I mean, as a Christian, we all have some assumptions about Moses. Okay, about his role as a prophet, and his relationship with God. And yet, if that's not mentioned in the sermon, if it's just kind of, if you're discussing a particular aspect of Moses, then that's all you're going to get. You're not going to get the leap to the other knowledge. Okay. And actually Chomsky made that argument very effectively against in the 50s against what at that time was called mechanical translation. Because he said that a computer can never he had the sentence, the box is in the pen. Okay. Now in English, we use pen both for this thing, okay, and a fenced off area, okay, and we spell them the exact same, we pronounce them the exact same. There's no difference in that, and yet you could put a box in a pen in a fenced off area, and I could conceive of a box small enough to go inside this one, and yet if you're trying to translate that, you have to know which of those it is referring to. Okay. And a computer just seeing the phrase or just seeing the sentence, the box is in the pen, doesn't know which kind of pen it is. And so that ambiguity, and even though in English we use the same word pen for both of those, in other languages, I mean, I could tell you in Japanese, those are two entirely different words. Okay. I mean, they have no relation to each other. It just happens to be in English that they're identical. And I don't know in what other language that those are, the same word. I mean, it can happen. But I don't think it's anything above chance.
What is the point? What you're trying to say here?
The point is that the computer can't accurately translate the phrase, the box is in the pen, unless it understands a reference to the pen, which one it is. Okay. That reference is only based on human knowledge, not strictly on linguistic knowledge. I mean, it has to have some frame of reference on that.
As you're speaking, I'm typing in ChatGPT to translate it. Let's see. Shall we do that experiment?
Okay.
Okay, let's see. Translate.
What language are you translating?
To Arabic.
Okay.
Translate this sentence.
So let me ask you: is pen, this thing, different from pen as in fenced off area in Arabic? Are they the same word?
Yes, absolutely. No, absolutely different. They're
absolutely different.
Yes,
that's very common. Okay, I mean that's my suspicion. I don't know all world languages, obviously.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. Yeah. So it translated it not as it doesn't make sense. It says that the box is in the pen, and the pen it referred as this pen. It did not refer to it as like the fenced.
And yet, if I had a fenced off area outside of my house, okay, and put a box in there and asked that to be translated into Arabic, ChatGPT would get it wrong. Okay. And so I would say, now I would agree with Chomsky that here it's impossible for the computer to know which one is correct without human knowledge.
That is so interesting. Wow. So now, yeah, because it looks like it did not know. It didn't even ask me, what do you mean, right? Like if a human is confused about something, they will ask. But ChatGPT is just like, oh, it says it as if so nonchalant, as if it's fact, although it doesn't make any logical sense for the box to be inside the actual this pen. And I think that the reason why it chooses this pen and not the other pen is because this is more common used in its database.
Yeah. All right. Sure. Absolutely. Okay. I mean, so a classic one from mechanical translation back in the 50s was to translate the phrase um, the uh, the spirit is willing but the body is weak. Okay. And it's just because spirit has a number of uses in English. Okay, it can be the spirit driving me inside me, or it can be an alcoholic spirit. You know, we call those spirits. And I mean, translate that via Chat GPT, and
You're putting these examples out there to demonstrate the point that ChatGPT is not knowing. It's not.
right,
It does not really understand. The output of this model or language model is to condense information and package it and deliver it to you in a
right,
well-structured, human-like text,
absolutely,
but
right.
there's nothing behind the machine, right? There's no depth to
Yeah,
it. It's not. So do you think the machine will ever have this kind of depth?
it would be really hard. I mean, that's a see, I mean, I'm amazed at ChatGPT. Okay, it's a wonderful system. I mean, it's incredibly clever programming. Um, and back when I was studying these topics back in the late '80s, the early '90s, um, to if somebody had told me that in 2024 we'd have something as brilliant and as vast as ChatGPT, I'd have said, sure, yeah, I believe you. Uh, um, but I mean, here it is 35 years afterwards and we have it. So, um, yeah, I mean, it's an amazing system for compressing information, but it's not understanding. Okay. And could we ever get to there? Um, well, I mean, since in 35 years we've made a huge jump, could we get another huge jump? Sure. I mean, I mean, who am I to predict that it won't? I mean, I can't predict NFL scores, so I'm not gonna say we could never get there. Um, it's just it's another massive problem, and I hope it can be solved. I mean, you know, will we ever get there? I don't know. I don't know. Um, I I I think it's a problem that can be solved, but do we have do we have the drive to do it?
Mm.
Um,
And do you think
do
it's
we
going to
have
be
to?
solved based on what we achieved right now with ChatGPT and these models, or is going to have a completely different paradigm?
Yeah, good question. I um I would go with a completely different paradigm on that one. Okay. I mean, would ChatGPT definitely has uses, and like I said, my friend who's a minister, she uses it to summarize her sermons, um, which is amazing. It's just, I think, I mean, for her to go beyond, you know, how would ChatGPT add biblical knowledge? Okay, that Moses was the person who brought the Ten Commandments down, that Moses was the person who led the Israelis out, or the Jews out of Egypt. All of those things are, um, all of those things are knowledge that anybody in our modern society who reads a ChatGPT summary is going to say, well, ChatGPT missed that. Okay, um, so um, could that be added to ChatGPT? I could see that happening. I mean, you'd have to add more knowledge based on specific words, um, and can that happen? I mean, it's a lot more memory. It's a lot more. It's a lot bigger knowledge base. Um, I mean, to my mind, they've solved phrasal or clausal, phrasal, sentence, and even paragraph construction. Okay, but those are all grammatical. Now, can they go to the morphological to pull in individual meaning on individual words? Yeah, I would assume that is possible. It's just grammar is of a certain size, and meaning space is vastly more than that. So, could it be done in very specific areas? Yes. But can it be done in general? I mean, could something be done to, that the boxes in the pen? Okay. Could you teach the computer that boxes can come in different sizes, and that pens can come in different, in English they come in very different, these are different meanings. Sure, I can see that. But then can you take it general so that it's, so that it works across the idea space? I see that as a problem for the next, 50 to 100 years, not just, I mean, I can see grabbing portions of that, but can you make it general?
I have a great analogy for you, and probably something to end this episode with. Could it be
Okay.
that with ChatGPT and all, we created the brain, but we're still missing the spirit, on the assumption that spirit is the one that fuels that brain to produce or to generate?
I like that. I like that a lot. Yeah, very much so. Yes. Yes, I like that analogy. Naja, I think you hit it right on the head. And congratulations on that. You summarized my last hour and a half of talking.
We created the machine, and I think what's missing is that element behind it.
Right,
JJ,
right.
it's been such a pleasure. I did not expect this much of depth and knowledge and wisdom. I can't thank you enough. This has been an amazing hour and a half.
Well, it's been a pleasure for me too. So thank you very much.
Thank you.